As we continue to follow this developing news, Ukrainian and Western leaders welcoming a desperately needed aid package passed by the U.S. House of Representatives. As the Kremlin warned, the passage of the bill would further ruin Ukraine and cause even more death. The House swiftly approved $95 billion in foreign aid for Ukraine, Israel, and other U.S. allies in a rare Saturday session as Democrats and Republicans banded together after months of hard right resistance over renewed American support for repelling Russia's invasion. Joining us live this morning to further explain the latest on all of these foreign policy bills is foreign policy expert Michael Zanto. Always a pleasure having you here on Live Now from Fox, Michael.
You're very welcome.
So for those that weren't able to see what happened in the House yesterday, catch us up. Very controversial. As we know, some lawmakers were against this, saying we need to actually protect our own borders here in the U.S.
Well, the aid to Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan had gotten hijacked by a fringe group that was threatening to remove the Republican Speaker of the House if he let it proceed. The Speaker of the House finally came forward with a plan to push it forward at risk of his own speakership. He may need the Democrats to support him to keep in office, but our Congress cannot be held hostage by a group of like 5 to 10 fringe extremists. So the House passed a package that will cover aid to Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, humanitarian aid for the Palestinians that was much needed. And the Senate, in the early part of this coming week, should soon pass the Senate version, and President Biden promises to sign it as soon as possible.
Michael, you talk about the humanitarian aid needed out in Gaza, and right now I just put up a feed showing those makeshift tents out there in that region, people fleeing to get some type of refuge from everything going on. But with all of the conflict in the Middle East, what's the likelihood this humanitarian aid will even get there safely?
I don't know, but that's another reason that Hamas terrorists are incredibly disgusting. They launched a genocidal campaign against the Israelis that involved mass murder, rape, having children's arms and legs cut off. And they did it from a highly concentrated population center. Gaza could be beautiful. Gaza could be like Singapore. In fact, Hamas tricked Israel into thinking that was their goal, which I guess was pretty naive given what Hamas is, a genocidal terrorist organization. But to wage war out of this highly populated center and to persist, if Hamas had any decency, if they cared at all about the Palestinians in Gaza, they would have surrendered. They would have worked out some deal that maybe would have guaranteed their survival, but they would have gotten out there. They're deliberately fighting a campaign to destroy Israel, which is insane. But if Israel didn't stay strong, other groups like Hamas, like Hezbollah, which has bigger numbers, or Iran, would actually try to continue this so that there would be 1 million Israelis dead or 2 million Israelis dead. This humanitarian problem is horrific. I know that the U.S. military, the Jordanian military, for example, is stepping up and trying to get food to the Palestinian people, that President Biden has a personal initiative to do that. And I know that our allies will continue to do their best. But when a country faces the kind of 9/11 atrocity, which in some ways is even more personal, when women and children are raped and tortured to death, it's hard to kind of then balance it with the humanitarian issues, which are entirely the responsibility of Hamas terrorists who deliberately wage war from civilian areas and highly densely populated cities.
Absolutely. And as you were speaking about that, I actually popped that camera shot back up. Our content partners at the Associated Press have panned over to a missile strike that had landed. You could see the plumes of smoke, and just further adding a picture to the devastation going on out in this Gaza region. As we were following breaking news this morning, Michael, the Gaza Health Ministry, which is run by Hamas, saying that Israeli airstrike killed 18 in Rafah. The fighting just continuing. We know Passover is tomorrow. People were hoping for some type of hostage release and even possible talks of a ceasefire, but all of that seems to be stale right now.
Yes. There is unfortunately a great risk that most of the hostages are actually dead. There is talk that only 40 are alive. It is, I am sure, a source of immense pain for the families. Terrorist groups, Hamas and Hezbollah, often like to torture families by not revealing if hostages are alive or dead. This is not the first time they've done it. It's before. They don't give the dead bodies. They leave everyone in doubt. We basically know that one of the challenges in getting the hostages released is almost certainly that they were being raped and tortured, and Hamas calculated that releasing the hostages would expose more of their atrocities and crimes. So the issue with the hostages is a really terrible situation. These were people kidnapped as negotiating chips. It was a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel that Hamas broke with the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. The whole situation is horrible. And Hamas has to be defeated so that terrorists around the world, including, frankly, the Russian government, doesn't think that this is the way to gain, that you can make gains by committing terrorist attacks, murdering civilians, and terrorizing democracies.
As we further this conversation, getting back to Capitol Hill with these foreign aid bills, we have seen and heard that Ukraine has noticed all of the aid going into Israel and saying that they wish the U.S. would have done more when it came to those missile strikes that were happening to them against Russia. Do you think this will further propel more U.S. aid as we talk about the Russia-Ukraine war? Because some would say that the talks of the Russia-Ukraine war kind of dwindled as we were seeing what was going on with Israel and Iran, and also Israel and Hamas.
Well, the stakes are very high with the Ukraine war. This is a major attack against the civilized democratic part of Europe. This is not chance. This is an intent of the Putin-led dictatorship in Russia. This is the biggest threat to the global order since basically 1945. Plus, Putin wants to refight the Cold War. It's understandable that the Ukrainians would be a little bit frustrated seeing U.S. naval assets used to supplement Israel's world-leading missile defense systems. Of course, Israel's the Arrow 3 as the David Sling Iron Dome, but the U.S. also used our naval ships, also had interceptors, and U.S. and British planes shot down some of the drones and cruise missiles. The reason you haven't seen this involvement by U.S. and British and perhaps French military assets to defend Ukraine is that would be sort of a direct military intervention, although shooting down drones and cruise missiles rather than actual Russian fighters. And our fear of intervention against the Russians is there's no hiding or not discussing the fact Russia has 6,000 nukes. They have 1,500, perhaps 2,000 nukes on intercontinental missiles that hit the United States in 30 minutes. Russia is the only country that can destroy the United States. In a total nuclear war, God forbid, between Russia and the United States would have global catastrophic consequences. So the US military and the British military is always incredibly cautious to avoid confrontations with the Russians, direct confrontations. I wish I could say the same about Putin's-led Russia, but that's not the case. But we also have to understand that there's a slippery slope. If we're always walking away from every confrontation with Russia, even when the Russians started, like when they bombed a U.S. air base in Syria in 2016, then there's a sudden, it could lead to a situation where the Russians gain enormous power over the world. They could practically just say boo and do whatever they want. So the Russians do have to be checked. The Russians do have to be stopped. But Ukraine is not a NATO country, and the U.S. is always very, very cautious about direct military activities against the Russian military. However, they need to know, the Russians need to know that there are red lines, and if they cross them, we will respond and we will act accordingly. And let me add, if the US and British Air Force intervened, the Ukraine war would be over. This is the tragic fact of having to deal with a rogue nuclear superpower, Russia. We could intervene tomorrow and the war would be over. But unfortunately, we have to be cautious because of the enormous nuclear arsenal that Russia has.
Michael Zanto, always a treat having you on with us here on Live Now from Fox. Your perspective and candidness and expertise truly painting a picture with all of these ongoing conflicts. Before I let you go, is there anything else you want to add? Anything we should be keeping a close eye on? Again, Passover is tomorrow, and many Jewish communities right here in the U.S. Are on edge and are on high alert. The FBI even mentioning some alerts for Jewish communities ahead of Passover.
I mean, the terrorist alarms are alarming. I mean, obviously that sounds like redundant, and I would take the FBI warnings seriously. However, we have to live our lives. Nobody should allow terrorists to terrorize them. There are always threats. September 11th, worst terrorist attack on our homeland in our history. Happened out of the blue, basically. I mean, people had heard of bin Laden and Al Qaeda, but, it was unexpected. So you can't live your life that way. Obviously, it is almost never a statistical risk to Americans, thank God. But let me just say the aid that was passed by the U.S. Congress is a sign of U.S. strength. It is a sign of bipartisan commitment to supporting our allies. That includes Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. So I think that we should feel good about that. A lot of the Iranian missiles didn't work. The US, British, and Israeli air defense with Jordanian fighter pilots as well proved perfect in intercepting the vast majority of missiles. So the good thing is Iran's military force was shown once again not to be so powerful. The Russians thought that they would be able to easily defeat Ukraine. That hasn't happened. So thank God that the House was able to put through this aid package for Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and others. And I think that we should be feeling very positive of living in the strongest, most powerful, richest country in the world. And I think that's something we can celebrate in Passover and other holidays, that we are still the leaders of the free world. Passover is about freedom. And that package to support Ukraine and Israel and Taiwan against murderous dictatorships and terrorists is about freedom. And I think that was what that aid package was all about. The United States is still the leader of the free world.
Michael Zanto, you're always able to trickle in that gleam of hope in the midst of hostile situations. Thank you so much again for joining us this morning. You enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.